Thoughts on cider. Our friend Dove Dulcet, the poet, came into our kennel and found us arm in arm with a deep demijohn of Chester County cider. We poured him out a beaker of the cloudy amber juice. It was just in prime condition, sharpened with a blithe tingle, beaded with a pleasing bubble of froth. Dove looked upon it with a kindled eye. His arm raised the tumbler in a manner that showed this gesture to be one that he had compassed before. The orchard nectar began to sluice down his throat. Dove is one who has faced many and grievous woes. His Celtic soul peers from behind cloudy curtains of alarm. Old unhappy far-off things and battles long ago fume in the smoke of his pipe. His girded spirit sees agrarian unrest in the daffodil and industrial riot in a tin of preserved prunes. He sees the world moving on the brink of horror and despair. Sweet dalliance with a baked bloater on a restaurant platter moves him to grief over the hard lot of the Newfoundland fishing fleet. 6 cups of tea warm him to anguish over the peonage of Sir Thomas Lipton's coolies in Ceylon. Souls in perplexity cluster round him like Canadian dimes in a cash register in Plattsburgh. N.Y. He is a human sympathy trust. When we are on our deathbed, we shall send for him. The perfection of his gentle sorrow will send us roaring out into the dark and will set a valuable example to the members of our family. But it is the rack of clouds that makes the sunset lovely. The bosomy vapours of Dove's soul are the palette upon which the decumbent sun of his spirit casts its vivid orange and scarlet colours. His joy is the more perfect to behold because it bursts goldenly through the pangs of his tender heart. His soul is like the infant Moses, cradled among dark and prickly bulrushes. But anon it floats out upon the river and drifts merrily downward on a sparkling spate. It has nothing to do with Dove, but we will here interject the remark that a pessimist overtaken by liquor is the cheeriest sight in the world. Who is so extravagantly, gloriously, and irresponsibly gay? Dove's eyes beaconed as the cider went its way. The sweet, lingering tang filled the arch of his palate with a soft, mellow cheer. His gaze fell upon us as his head tilted gently backward. We wish there had been a painter there, someone like F. Walter Taylor, to rush onto canvas the gorgeous benignity of his aspect. It would have been a portrait of the rich Flemish school. Dove's eyes were full of a tender emotion, mingled with a charmed and wistful surprise. It was as though the poet was saying he had not realized there was anything so good left on earth. His bearing was devout, religious, mystical. In one moment of revelation, so it appeared to us as we watched, Dove looked upon all the profiles and aspects of life and found them of noble outline. Not since the grandest of grand old parties went out of power has Dove looked less as though he felt the world were on the verge of an abyss. For several moments revolution and anarchy receded, profiteers were tamed, capital and labour purred together on a mattress of catnip, and the cosmos became a free verse poem. He did not even utter the customary and ungracious remark of those to whom cider potations are given. That'll be at its best in about a week. We apologized for the cider being a little warmish from standing, discreetly hidden, under our desk. "Deuce, man," he said, "I think cider, like ale, ought not to be drunk too cold. I like it just this way." He stood for a moment, filled with theology and metaphysics. "By gracious," he said, "it makes all the other stuff taste like poison." Still he stood for a brief instant, transfixed with complete bliss. It was apparent to us that his mind was busy with apple orchards and autumn sunshine. Perhaps he was wondering whether he could make a poem out of it. Then he turned softly and went back to his job in a life insurance office. As for ourselves, we then poured out another tumbler, lit a corncob pipe, and meditated. Falstaff once said that he had forgotten what the inside of a church looked like. There will come a time when many of us will perhaps have forgotten what the inside of a saloon looked like, but there will still be the consolation of the cider jug. Like the smell of roasting chestnuts and the comfortable equatorial warmth of an oyster stew, it is a consolation hard to put into words. It calls irresistibly for tobacco. In fact, the true cider toper always pulls a long puff at his pipe before each drink and blows some of the smoke into the glass so that he gulps down some of the blue reek with his draught. Just why this should be, we know not. Also, some enthusiasts insist on having small sugared cookies with their cider. Others cry loudly for reading pretzels. Some have ingenious theories about letting the jug stand, either tightly stoppered or else unstoppered, until it becomes hard. In our experience, hard cider is distressingly like drinking vinegar. We prefer it soft, with all its sweetness and the transfusing savor of the fruit animating it. At the peak of its deliciousness, it has a small, airy sparkle against the roof of the mouth, a delicate tactile sensation like the feet of dancing flies. This, we presume, is the 412 to 7% of sin with which fermented cider is credited by works of reference. There are pedants and bigots who insist that the jug must be stoppered with a corncob. For our own part, the stopper does not stay in the neck long enough after the demijohn reaches us to make it worthwhile worrying about this matter. Yet a nice attention to detail may prove that the cob has some secret affinity with cider, for a Missouri meerschaum never tastes so well as after 3 glasses of this rustic elixir. That ingenious student of social niceties, John Mistletoe, in his famous Dictionary of Deplorable Facts, a book which we heartily commend to the curious, for he includes a long and most informing article on cider, tracing its etymology from the old Hebrew word shaker, meaning to quaff deeply, maintains that cider should only be drunk beside an open fire of applewood logs, and preferably on an evening of storm and wetness, when the swish and sudden pattering of rain against the panes lend an added agreeable snugness to the cheerful scene within, where master and dame sit by the rosy hearth, frying sausages in a pan laid on the embers. This reminds one of the anecdote related by ex-Senator Beveridge in his Life of John Marshall. Justice Story told his wife that the justices of the Supreme Court were of a self-denying habit, never taking wine except in wet weather. But it does sometimes happen that the Chief Justice will say to me, when the cloth is removed, "Brother Story, step to the window and see if it does not look like rain." And if I tell him that the sun is shining brightly, Judge Marshall will sometimes reply, "All the better, for our jurisdiction extends over so large a territory that the doctrine of chances makes it certain that it must be raining somewhere." Our own theory about cider is that the time to drink it is when it reaches you, and if it hails from Chester County, so much the better. We remember with gusto a little soliloquy on cider delivered by another friend of ours, as we both stood in a decent ordinary on Fulton Street, going through all the motions of jocularity and cheer. "Cider," he said, "is our refuge and strength. Cider," he insisted, drawing from his pocket a clipping much tarnished with age, "is a drink for men of reason and genteel nurture, a drink for such as desire to drink pleasantly, amiably, healthily, and with perseverance, and yet retain the command and superintendence of their faculties. I have here," he continued, "a clipping sent me by an eminent architect in the great city of Philadelphia, a city which it is a pleasure for me to contemplate by reason of the beauty and virtue of its women, the infinite vivacity and good temper of its men, the rectitudinal disposition of its highways. I have here," he exclaimed, "a clipping sent me by an architect of fame, charming parts, and infinite cellarage, explaining the virtues of cider. Cider," this clipping asserts, "produces a clearness of the complexion. It brightens the eye, particularly in women, conducing to the composition of generous compliment and all the social suavity that endears the intercourse of the sexes. Longevity," this extract maintains, "is the result of application to good cider. The Reverend Martin Johnson, vicar of Dilwyn in Herefordshire, from 1651 to 1698, he read from his clipping, wrote, "This parish, wherein cider is plentiful, hath many people that do enjoy this blessing of long life. Neither are the aged bedridden or decrepit as elsewhere. Next to God, we ascribe it to our flourishing orchards. First, that the bloomed trees in spring do not only sweeten, but purify the ambient air. Next, that they yield us plenty of rich and winy liquors, which do conduce very much to the constant health of our inhabitants. Their ordinary course is to breakfast and sup with toast and cider through the whole Lent, which heightens their appetites and creates in them durable strength to labor." There was a pause, And our friend, he is a man of girth, and with a brow bearing all the candour of a life of intense thought, leaned against the mahogany counter. "That is very fine," we said, draining our chalice and feeling brightness of eye, length of years, and durable strength to labour added to our person. "In the meantime," we said, "why do you not drink the rich and winey liquor which your vessel contains?" He folded up his clipping and put it away with a sigh. "I always have to read that first," he said, "to make the damned stuff palatable. It will be 10 years," he said, "before the friend who sent me that clipping will have to drink any cider." One-night stands. To those looking for an exhilarating vacation, let us commend a week of trouping on one-night stands with a theatrical company, which mirthful experience has just been ours. We went along in the very lowly capacity of co-author, which placed us somewhat beneath the stage-hands as far as dignity was concerned. And we flatter ourselves that we have learned our station and observe it with due humility. The first task of the director who stages a play is to let the author know where he gets off. This was accomplished in our case by an argument concerning a speech in the play where one of the characters remarks, "I propose to send a mental message to Eliza." This sounds, we contend, quite a harmless sentiment, but the director insisted that the person speaking, being an Englishman of studious disposition, would not say anything so inaccurate. "He would use much more correct language," said the director. "He ought to say, 'I purpose to send.'" We balked mildly at this. "All right," said our mentor. "The trouble with you is you don't know any English. I'll send you a copy of the Century Dictionary." This gentleman carried purism to almost extravagant lengths. He objected to the customary pronunciation of Jew's harp, insisting that the word should be juice harp, and instructing the actor who mentioned this innocent instrument of melody to write it down so in his script. When the dress rehearsal came round, he was surveying the set for the first act with considerable complacence. This scenery was intended to represent a very ancient English inn at Stratford-on-Avon, and one of the authors was heard to remark softly that it looked more like a broker's office on Wall Street, but the director was unshaken. "There's an old English inn up at Larchmont," said he, "and this looks a good deal like it, so I guess we're all right." Let anyone who imagines the actor's life is one of Bevo and Skittles Sally, along with a new play on its tryout in the one-night circuit. When one sees the delightful humour, fortitude, and high spirits with which the players face their task, he gains a new respect for the profession. It is with a sense of shame that the wincing author hears his lines repeated night after night, lines that seem to him to have grown so stale and disreputably stupid, and which the ingenuity of the players contrives to instil with life. With a sense of shame indeed does he reflect that because one day long ago he was struck with a preposterous idea, here are honest folk, depending on it, to earn daily bread and travelling on a rainy day on a local train on the Central New England Railway. Here are 800 people in Saratoga Springs filing into a theatre with naive expectation on their faces. Amusing things happen faster than he can stay to count them. A fire breaks out in a cigar store a few minutes before theatre time. It is extinguished immediately, but half the town has rushed down to see the excitement. The cigar store is almost next door to the theatre, and the crowd sees the lighted sign and drops in to give the show the once-over, thus giving one a capacity house. Then there are the amusing accidents that happen on the stage due to the inevitable confusion of one-night stands with long jumps each day when scenery and props arrive at the theatre barely in time to be set up. In the third act, one of the characters has to take his trousers out of a handbag. He opens the bag, but by some error, no garments are within. Heavens! Has the stage manager mixed up the bags? He has only one hope. The girlish heroine's luggage is also on the stage, and our comedian dashes over and finds his trousers in her bag. This casts a most sinister imputation on the adorable heroine, but our friend, blessings on him, contrives it so delicately that the audience doesn't get wise. Then doors that are supposed to be locked have a habit of swinging open, and the luckless heroine, ready to say furiously to the hero, "Will you unlock the door?" finds herself facing an open doorway and has to invent a line to get herself off the stage. Going on the road is a very humanizing experience, and one gathers a considerable respect for the small towns one visits. They are so brisk, so proud in their local achievements, so prosperous, and so full of attractive shop windows. When one finds in Johnstown, NY for instance, a bookshop with almost as well assorted a stock as one would see here in Philadelphia, or in Gloversville and Newburgh public libraries that would be a credit to any large city, one realizes the great tide of public intelligence that has risen perceptibly in recent years. At the hotel in Gloversville, the proprietress assured us that an English duke had just left who told her that he preferred her hotel to the Biltmore in New York. We rather wondered about this English duke, but we looked him up on the register and found that he was Sir H. Ernick of Fownes Brothers, the glove manufacturers, who have a factory in Gloversville. But then, being a glove manufacturer, he may have been kidding her, as the low comedian of our troupe observed. But the local pride of the small town is a genial thing. It may always be noted in the barber shops. The small-town barber knows his customers, and when a strange face appears to be shaved on the afternoon when the bills are announcing a play, he puts two and two together. "Are you with that show?" he asks, and being answered in the affirmative, one naturally would not admit that one is merely there in the frugal capacity of co-author, and hopes that he will imagine that such a face might conceivably belong to the low comedian. He proceeds to expound the favorite doctrine that this is a wise burg. "Yes," he says, "folks here are pretty cagey. If your show can get by here, you needn't worry about New York. Believe me, if you get a hand here, you can go right down to Broadway. I always take in the shows, and I've heard lots of actors say this town is harder to please than any place they ever played." One gets a new viewpoint on many matters by a week of one-night stands. Theatrical billboards, for instance. We had always thought, in a vague kind of way, that they were a defacement to a town and cluttered up blank spaces in an unseemly way. But when you are trouping, the first thing you do, after registering at the hotel, is to go out and scout round the town, yearning for billboards and complaining because there aren't enough of them. You meet another member of the company on the same errand and say, "I don't see much paper out," this being the technical phrase. You both agree that the advance agent must be loafing. Then you set out to see what opposition you are playing against, and emit groans on learning that the $1 million doll in Paris is also in town, or Harry Bulger's girly show will be there the following evening, or Max Sennett's bathing beauties in person. "That's the kind of stuff they fall for," said the other author mournfully. "And you hustle around to the box office to see whether the ticket rack is still full of unsold pasteboard. At this time of year, when all the metropolitan theatres are crowded and there are some 30 plays cruising round in the offing, waiting for a chance to get into New York and praying that some show now there will flop, one crosses the trail of many other wandering troupes that are battering about from town to town. In remote Johnstown, NY, which can only be reached by trolley and where there is no hotel, but a very fine large theatre, one finds that Miss Grace George is to be the next attraction. On the train to Saratoga, one rides on the same train with the $1 million doll, and those who have seen her paper on the billboards in Newburgh or Poughkeepsie keep an attentive optic open for the lady herself to see how nearly she lives up to her lithographs. And if the passerby should see a lighted window in the hotel glimmering at 2 in the morning, he will probably aver that there are some of those light-hearted show people carousing over a flagon of Virginia Dare. Little does he suspect that long after the tranquil thespians have gone to their well-earned hay, the miserable authors of the trying-out piece may be vigiling together, trying to dope out a new scene for the third act. The saying is not new, but it comes frequently to the lips of the one-night stander. It's a great life if you don't weaken.